Aloha friends, welcome to my channel, Bedtime Story for You, where I read bedtime stories on the public domain and you can relax or drift off to sleep. Tonight we're starting with Sinbad the Sailor and the first voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. In the time of Harun ar-Rashid, there was in Baghdad a rich merchant named Sinbad the Sailor, the source of whose wealth was a mystery. It seemed to be inexhaustible. For long seasons he kept open house, and his entertainments were the most magnificent of all save only those of ar-Rashid himself. All that riches could buy seemed at his disposal, and he lavished the goods of this life upon his guests. Pages, slaves, and attendants there were in great number. His garden was spacious and beautiful, and his house was filled with every costly luxury. This Sinbad the Sailor has a story to tell, the story of his life, but he never told it to any until one day there came to him one Sinbad the landsman, a man of poor and humble birth. This man pleased him greatly with an apt recitation dealing with the widely different lots dispensed by God to men. And being pleased, he was struck with the happy conceit that now Sinbad the Sailor was at last confronted with Sinbad the landsman. It would be no bad thing were he to narrate the story of his life, so that all might know his strange adventures and conjecture no longer as to the source of his fabulous wealth. Accordingly, Sinbad the Sailor held 7 receptions on 7 different days, and although on each occasion a multitude of guests were assembled to listen, he failed not to address his words from first to last to his simple listener, Sinbad the landsman. Following is his narration of the strange and wonderful adventures he experienced in his 7 voyages. The first voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. My father was a merchant of high rank and rich possessions. He died when I was but a child, leaving me all his wealth. When I reached manhood's estate, I used my inheritance with no thought for the morrow, living in a sumptuous manner and consorting with the richest young men of Baghdad. I continued this life for many years until at last, when reason prevailed with me to mend my plan, I found with dismay that I had sunk to poverty, and then it was that I arose and sold what goods remained to me for 3,000 pieces of silver, and girded myself, resolving to travel to other lands and rebuild my fortune by the wit of my mind and the labor of my hands. With a part of my hoard, I bought merchandise for exchange in far lands, and also such things as I should require in my travels. Thus prepared, I set sail with a company of merchants in a ship bound for the city El-Basra. For many days and nights we sailed upon the sea, visiting islands and passing thence to other islands, and everywhere we bartered and bought and sold. At length we came to an island unlike the others. It seemed like a garden that had floated from off the sides of paradise and established itself in the sea. And here our ship cast anchor and we landed. Then fires were lighted, and while some cooked, others washed in the cool stream, and yet others amused themselves admiring the beauties of the place. When all had eaten of the food prepared, the shore became a happy scene of sport and play in which I engaged to the full. But suddenly a cry from the master of the ship put an end to our gaiety. Standing at the side of the vessel, he called loudly, "Hear me, and may God preserve you. Hasten back and leave everything. Save yourselves from sudden death, for this that ye think is an island is not such. It is a mighty fish lying entranced in sleep on the surface of the sea since times of old, and trees have grown upon it. But your fires and your frolicking have awakened it, and lo, it moves. And if it sink into the sea, you will assuredly be drowned. Hasten then and save yourselves." At this we all, with one accord, left everything and fled for the ship, hoping to escape with our lives. While we were making for safety, the island moved with a great turmoil and sank behind us in the sea, and the waves leapt against each other above it. For a time I gave myself up for lost, for I was drawn down fathoms deep, but by God's grace I rose again to the surface, and to my hand was one of the large wooden bowls which some of the passengers had taken on shore for the purpose of bathing. This I seized and established myself in it, and thus combated the leaping waves, steadying myself with my hands and feet. In vain I called on the master of the ship, but he heard me not. He had spread his sails and pursued his way, thinking that none beside those who had been taken up were left alive. Astride my wooden bowl, I gazed longingly at the ship until it was out of sight. Then I prepared for death as the night was closing around me. Perchance I swooned, for I remembered naught else until I found myself stranded upon a mountainous island. There were trees overhanging, and I grasped a drooping bough and drew myself up from the fretting wave. My limbs were benumbed, and on looking at my legs, I saw the marks made by the nibbling teeth of fish, and marveled at my salvation from death. Staggering forward, I flung myself high on the beach like one who is dead, and so I remained until the dawn of the next day, when the sun, rising upon me, woke me to a sense of such a condition as I had never known before. Long it was before I could rise to a sitting posture, and longer still before I could crawl on my hands and knees to a space of grass that was shielded from the sun. Thence in time I staggered till I came to a brook of which I drank, and strength returned to me. I found luscious fruits and ate of them, and drank again of the clear waters of the brook. And so I continued many days roaming the island and wondering at its beauties until I was strong again as before. And it chanced, as I took my way to and fro in the island, reveling in the sight of things that God had set there, that on a day when the sea was sounding loudly on the shore, I beheld something in the distance which excited my curiosity. It seemed like a wild animal of gigantic size, and as I approached, I feared it was some fabulous beast of the sea. But as I drew still nearer, I was overcome with amazement to see a beautiful mare standing high with mane and tail floating on the breeze. She was tethered to a stake on the shore, and at sight of me she screamed loudly and stamped her forefeet on the sand. But ere I turned to flee, I beheld a man come forth from a cave nearby, and he ran after me, calling on me to give an account of myself and my presence in that place. Thereupon I laid my story before him, sparing no detail, even to the wooden bowl, by means of which, and the grace of God, I had come thither. Gladness seized him at my recital, and he took my hand, saying, "Come with me." He led me into his cave and set food before me. I ate until I was satisfied, and being at my ease, I repeated my story more minutely, and he wondered thereat. Then I said, "Thou hast the truth of my adventures upon the sea. Now I pray thee, O my master, tell me who art thou, that thou dwellest hidden in a cave, while thy mare is tethered on the shore?" He was in no way displeased at my curiosity, but answered me in plain words, "I am one of the grooms of the king El-Mihraj," he said, "and the others are scattered about the island. For look you, friend, it is the time of the new moon, when the seahorse cometh up out of the sea, and it is our plan to bring our best mares hither and tether them by the shore, so that they may lure the seahorses into our hands." While I was wondering at the manner of this cunning device, a magnificent seahorse rose from the waves, shaking the foam from its crest and neighing loudly. As it approached, my companion drew me into the cave and placed himself at the opening with a long coil of thick cord in his hand. Presently, by means of this, he leashed the seahorse with great dexterity and fettered him and subdued him. Then, with the mare and the seahorse, he led me to his companions, who, when they had heard my story, were all of one mind that I should accompany them to the city of the king. So they mounted me on one of the mares, and I rode with them to the king's palace. As soon as we had arrived at the palace gates, they went in to the king and informed him of my strange adventures, whereupon he sent for me, and they led me before him, and he greeted me very courteously, and bade me tell him my story, which when he had heard it, filled him with amazement, so that he cried, "By Allah, my son, of a truth, thou art favored by fate, for how else couldst thou escape so great a peril? Praise God for thy deliverance." And he made much of me, and caused me to be treated with honor, and he appointed me master of the harbor and comptroller of the shipping. My condition was no longer that of a wayfarer. I rose day by day to a higher place in the king's favor, and he took me into his council in all affairs of state. For a long time I served him well, and he ceased not to recompense me with a liberal hand. Yet my thoughts turned ever to Baghdad, the abode of peace. But when I inquired of merchants and travelers and masters of ships in which direction it lay and how one might come at it, they one and all shook their heads at the name of a strange city of which they had never heard. At last, weary of the wonders of that island and the sea around it, wonders the which, if I had time to tell you, would cause you the greatest amazement, they all wearied me too, with my arduous duties, but most of all with my prolonged absence from my own land. I stood one day on the seashore when a great ship drew near, and a number of merchants landed from it. The sailors brought forth their merchandise, and when I had made an account of it, I inquired of the master of the ship if that were the whole of his cargo. "All, O master," he replied, "all save some bales, whose owner was drowned on our voyage hither. But even these being in my charge, I desire to sell on behalf of his family in Baghdad." "Sayest thou so?" I cried. "Tell me, I pray thee, the name of the owner of these goods." And he replied, "His name was Sinbad the Sailor, and he was drowned on our way hither." When I heard this, I regarded him more closely and recognized him. Then I cried out, "O my master, I am he, and they are my goods that are in thy hold." But he neither recognized me nor believed my words, whereupon I narrated to him the story of my supposed death. But he shook his head and called upon Allah to witness that there was neither faith nor conscience in any. "Look you," he said, "thou heardest me say the owner was dead, and therefore thou desirest the goods for thyself free of price. I tell thee, we saw him sink into the sea with many others." "O my master," I answered, "hear me, and then judge of my veracity." With this I narrated to him many trivial things which happened before we reached the great fish island, and which could never be known to me had I not been on the ship. And then it was that he and many of the merchants regarded me with fixed looks and recognized me. "By Allah," they said, one and all, "we truly believed thee drowned, but here we find thee alive." And they pressed upon me and congratulated me, and the master of the ship gave me my goods, at sight of which I was overjoyed, and they all rejoiced with me. Mindful of the king I served, I at once opened my bales, and selecting the most costly articles, went in to him and laid them at his feet, telling him how I had regained the goods of which they were a part. and the king wondered greatly at my good fortune and graciously accepted my gifts. He also showed me great favor and honor in that he bestowed upon me gifts in return for mine. Then, having sold my remaining goods at a profit, I bought largely of the merchandise of the city, and when the ship was about to sail, I approached the king and thanked him for his great kindness to me, and humbly begged his leave to depart to my own city and family. So he gave me his blessing and a great wealth of merchandise and rare commodities, and bade me farewell. And soon thereafter, having stowed all my goods in the hold of the ship, I set sail with the others for Baghdad. Our voyage was fortunate, and with the aid of favorable winds, we reached the city of El Basra in safety. Thence I repaired to Baghdad, and my family and my friends gave me a joyous welcome. And when I had sold my merchandise, I set up a large establishment sparing no cost, and I bought land and houses and gathered round me wealthy companions, in whose society I soon forgot the dangers and terrors I had suffered in other lands. Such is the story of my first voyage, and tomorrow, by God's grace, I will narrate to you the strange adventures of my second voyage. The second voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. As I related yesterday, I was living here in Baghdad in the midst of every delight, surrounded by companions after my own heart. But a time came when the wandering spirit seized me again, and I longed for the sight, even for the perils of other and unknown lands. This and the fact that I had decreased my substance by large expenditure led me to adventure a second journey, at once to relieve the monotony of life and to replenish my exhausted store. The step was quickly taken. Having collected suitable merchandise, I repaired to the river, and without a word to anyone, embarked on a new ship, finely rigged and manned by a large crew. Together with a goodly party of merchants, I sailed away, and we passed over the deep, from island to island and from sea to sea, with fair winds filling the sails. And at every pace at which we cast anchor, we bought and sold and bartered. So we continued until we came to an uninhabited island of great beauty. The trees hung with ripe fruits, birds of bright plumage flew hither and thither over the shining foliage, and their songs were heard in the topmost branches. Rare flowers laid their scent upon the breeze, and pure, clear streams coursed everywhere. When we landed, we fell to extolling these master touches of the Creator's hand, for indeed the place was, as it were, born of fragrant musk, so fresh and beautiful, and full of all delights not made by man. And selecting a rare spot on the bank of a stream, I sat apart, meditating upon the wonderful works of the Omnipotent One. There the soft zephyrs singing in the trees, and the stream murmuring at my feet, lulled me to slumber, and when I awoke later, I looked forth upon the sea, and lo, the ship was far out on the wall of the ocean, sloping to the sky. They had forgotten me, and I was left alone upon the island. Despair fell upon me as I gazed around and realized that I was desolate. And I said within myself, what if I escaped from dangers in the past when all seemed lost? It still remains that here at least there is no escape. Then I blamed myself for leaving my comfortable life in Baghdad to undertake this voyage, for here there was neither strong food nor strong drink, no rich apparel, nor gold, nor goods. As I pondered to the point of madness on these things, a restless spirit came upon me, and I ran to and fro in the island, retracing my steps and crossing them, but I found naught to lessen my despair. At last I climbed to the top of a high tree, and looking forth in every direction, saw only sky and sea and trees and watercourses. As I gazed, however, My eye reverted again and again to an object in a distant part of the island. It was round and white and of enormous size. This aroused my curiosity, and I resolved to find out what it was. Having marked its position, I descended from the tree and made my way towards it. When I reached it, I found to my astonishment that it was a gigantic dome, white and shining. My first thought was to walk round it to ascertain if there were some door or opening, but none could I find in its whole circumference, which was about 50 paces. While I was meditating on some means to gain an entrance to this strange structure, behold, the sky darkened, and on looking towards the sinking sun, I saw it was hidden by a great black cloud, an unwanted thing, as it was the summer season. While I continued to gaze, the object drew rapidly nearer, and now I could discern in it the shape of a monstrous bird approaching swiftly through the air, and this it was that blotted out the sun. Marveling greatly, I recalled the story told by travelers about certain islands where was found a bird of immense size called the rook, which fed its young on elephants. It was then I knew that the great white dome I had discovered was one of this bird's eggs, at which not the least of the Creator's works I wondered greatly. Then, while I so wondered, the giant bird alighted over the egg, and crouching down, spread its wings and brooded over it, and composed itself to sleep. Here, thought I, was a chance of escaping from the island. Unfolding my turban, I twisted it into a rope, and bound one end of it tightly about my waist. Then I approached the great bird cautiously, and fastened the other end securely to one of its feet, for thus when it flew away, it might perchance bear me through the air to some inhabited region. The whole night long I lay awake thinking of my projected flight, but it was not until morning that the bird awoke, and with a loud cry rose from the egg, bearing me aloft. Higher and higher it soared until I thought it must reach the stars. Then gradually in vast circles it descended and finally came to earth on a high tableland. In great fear lest the bird should discover my presence, I made haste to loosen the turban from its foot, and having done so, I crept away, trembling in every limb. Then, as I watched the bird from a distance, I observed it pick something from the ground and soar away with it clutched in its talons. And I looked again and saw that it was an enormous serpent twisting and writhing in the grasp of the bird as it flew swiftly towards the sea. And at this strange thing I wondered greatly as I folded my turban. But what desert place had I come to by this daring misadventure? On the one side of the tableland was a deep valley, and on the other side a steep mountain which no foot of man could climb. Had I only remained in the island, I should at least have had fruit to eat and water to drink, but here was nothing but desolation from which I had no hope of escape. There was no course but to descend into the valley, and this I did, little caring whither I went. Now I had not walked therein but a few furlongs, when I observed that the ground I trod was strewn with diamonds of large size. But, and this gave me cause for wild alarm, coiled here and there amongst the stones were gigantic serpents, such as the one I had seen the bird bear away in its talons. As soon as I was aware of these sleeping serpents, which were of the same hue as the ground whereon they lay, I stepped warily, lest I should awaken them and be devoured. In this way was I proceeding down that valley, my flesh quaking and my knees a-tremble, when suddenly the flayed carcass of a slaughtered beast fell with a great noise before me. This aroused great wonder in my mind, and also called to my recollection a story I had heard in my youth from a merchant traveler who had visited lands whence none else had ever come to deny the truth of it. A story confirmed by others who claimed a reputation for wide knowledge and feared to lose it. It was this, that in a far land where diamonds are as thickly strewn as the venomous serpents and other deadly perils which render it difficult to come at them, the daring merchants who seek these precious stones employ a cunning stratagem. They take a beast and slaughter it on the heights above the valley, and having skinned it and lacerated the flesh, they throw it down, and when it reaches the bottom of the valley whereon the diamonds lie, the stones adhere to the moist flesh. From the depths of the sky descends the watching vulture of the giant kind, and this bird, seizing the carcass in its talons, soars with it to the mountain tops, whereupon the merchants spring out and frighten the bird away with loud cries, and then take the stones, adhering to the meat, and bear them to their own country. I had my whole life long regarded this story with a half-shut eye, but now, beholding the slaughtered beast before me, and guessing full well the meaning of its presence there, I said within myself, "By Allah, no marvel is past belief, for here is the verification." I surveyed that carcass, and having measured in a glance from the distance of the mountains whence it had descended, I gazed into the blue sky, in whose depths lurked the watching vulture. A plan of escape then came to me, and I hastened to put it into operation. First, I gathered as many diamonds as I could, well disposed within my garments. Then, unfolding my turban, I approached the slaughtered beast, and lying on my back, drew it over me, and bound myself firmly to it. I had not lain long in that position with the heavy weight of the beast upon me, when a monstrous vulture came out of the sky, and seizing upon the carcass with a loud scream, gripped it in its powerful talons, and rose up and away with it and me. And it rose higher and higher with the mighty flapping of its wings, until at last it alighted on a broad ledge near the summit of the mountain, a place which, judging by the bleached bones lying on every hand, was the favorite feeding place of these birds. This was clearly known to the merchant who had cast the carcass down, for no sooner had the vulture deposited his burden and started to tear at the flesh than he sprang out with loud cries and scared it away. Half smothered by the weight of the slaughtered beast, I lost no time in freeing myself, and soon I struggled to my feet and stood there with my clothes stained and polluted with its blood. When the merchant saw me, his fear was great, but his disappointment was even greater. When his fear mastered by the lust of gain, he turned the carcass over and found no diamond sticking to the flesh. Pitying him in his sad case, for he was smiting hand on hand and calling out against fate, I advanced and said, "Curse not fate, nor curse or fear me, for I am of the kind, and I hear with me an abundance of these stones, the loss of which thou lamentest, and they are of the largest that a man can carry, upborne by a vulture's wings. These will I give unto thee, therefore forget thy fear, and bury thy disappointment." On hearing this, the merchant thanked me, and prayed fervently for me and my family, and he ceased not to pray for the prolongation of my life, until I had bestowed upon him the largest diamonds I could find within my garments. While he was thanking me for this, there came his companions, each of whom had cast down a carcass. When they had heard the story of my escape, they congratulated me and bade me come with them, for they said, "By Allah, thou art greatly favored for fate, since none but thee hast been in that valley and escaped to tell the tale. After my perilous adventures and my despairing sojourn in the valley of the serpents, I was filled with the utmost joy at finding my fellow mortals around me, and seeing this, they made me welcome among them, and I partook of their food and wine. We passed the night in a safe place, and when morning came, we set forth over the mountain ranges overlooking the valley of the serpents, and at length descended to a stretch of sea. This we crossed by means of the boats which they had moored by the shore, and came thus to a low-lying island where grew camphor trees in abundance, each of which might shield 100 men from the sun. Here, too, upon the plains roamed the wild rhinoceros, of which wonderful tales are told by people who return from unknown lands. This beast impales an elephant upon its horn and wanders thus with little hindrance to its pasturing until the fat of the elephant, melting in the heat of the sun and flowing down into its eyes, render it blind, whereupon it seeks the seashore and lies down until such time as the rook may find it and carry both it and the elephant away as a morsel for its young. But I speak of what I know, and as I saw the naught of this kind, I can but say that I know not. I continued with my companions for some space, journeying from an island to island, and exchanging the diamonds we had acquired for rich merchandise. And in passing through many countries unheard of in this city, I separated from them and went my way, coming at length to El Basra, the princely cargo of goods. Thence I journeyed to Baghdad, the abode of peace, and rejoined my family. Wealth I had in abundance, and resorted to my former life of luxury, bestowing gifts and alms, wearing rich apparel, and eating and drinking with my companions. This is the story of my second voyage, and by the grace of God, whose name be exalted, I will narrate tomorrow the still more remarkable adventures that befell me on my third voyage.